Listen,
Never in my life associated the word boring with baseball.
We know what's up.
Me? Yeah. Famous? Yeah.
And I'm like giddy over there smiling like, we're about to win this shit.
Did everyone give you crap? Give me a good host story.
I'm not picking it up.
We both love the game.
we talk about it every day.
Getting on baseball.
Having some popcorn, you're fooling around your phone.
I'd have to wait in line for 3 hours.
Hang on, because it's about to be a wild ride.
All right, there's no human being I'd rather be talking to right now than Scott Miller. Fact.
Wow, that's quite an intro.
Oh, man, Scott, honestly, I can say this is that, usually it's the winter meetings. We see all the writers from everywhere and we get a chance to catch up. And, for the most part, it's pretty good, but everyone's running around. I can honestly say, throughout my years, you've been so kind to me. And you've always brought a smile to my face. And you legitimately, when you see someone, and this is a good way to, I don't do this for every podcast guest, but I'm going to do it with you because it's true. But when you see someone, it's like you actually seem like you care about seeing them. And I always appreciate that. So it's not why you're on the podcast right now, but as long as you're here, I want to say that to you. So thank you.
That's very kind of you. Rob, I'll tell you, I always say, baseball writing to me, it's almost like in the Catholic Church, you hear certain people are called to become priests. And I felt like that with baseball writing. I mean, I grew up reading the newspapers in Michigan and Detroit Free Press, Detroit News. And by seventh grade, maybe, I'm reading about the Tigers. I'm like, this seems pretty cool. This is a job you could just go write about baseball. And so that's all I ever want to do. But here's the trick, tied in with what you just said about seeing fellow writers at the winter meetings or in press boxes or whatever. There was a time, I wanted to be a baseball writer because I loved the game and, I wanted to be in press boxes and watch the game and write about the game. But the pleasant surprise is once I got into the business, and now it's 30 years down the road, is what I didn't know then, but I came to learn is, it's great being able to watch baseball every night. But the one thing that's even better than that is the friends you make across the country, such as yourself, and whoever it is. We can walk into a press box in Boston, in Los Angeles, in Houston, wherever the city is, be it April or July or, the winter meetings, as you mentioned. And we've got friends all over the place and that we've built over the years. Anyway, so I appreciate you saying that. It's always a pleasure to run into you, and it's part of what makes the job and life so rich.
Well, it's so true. I mean, it's so true. It's a community of people. And it's funny when you're saying that, when you're talking about how you fell in love with wanting to be a baseball writer. I think there's a similar story for a lot of people. And I kind of wonder now, this isn't really what I wanted to talk about, but I wonder now what does that look like for the next wave of baseball writers? Does that mean, I fell in love with watching the TikTok videos. I fell in love with the idea of, podcasts. I fell in love. It's because when you're talking about it, I'm thinking, well, I'm running out to get the newspaper and I'm devouring Lee Montville or whoever it is, and saying, "Oh, this is great," and you're going through all the box scores. And again, this is old man yelling at clouds, but still, I wonder what that iteration is. And I don't think that it's necessarily changed, because I think people are still falling in love with it. It's just maybe they're just doing it in a different way. Maybe they're doing it in a 30-second video on social media. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, it's totally changed, no doubt about it, because I mean, reading newspapers now, which I still
does that happen?
I'm a newspaper junkie still, but now, right, what it looks like, and I'm one of the last holdouts. I still get a couple newspapers physically dropped in my driveway every day, but then on the iPad, I subscribe to several other newspapers, and I'm still able to read them and devour them. But you're right, you don't see them in airport gift stores and on the streets in boxes like we once did. They're hard to find physically unless you're getting them delivered.
Right. But Scott, what I would say hasn't changed, and this is the greatest thing about writing and covering baseball, more so than any other sports, and you do such a good job of this, is there are so many stories. There's sure you have the games and you have the standings and you have the free agency and everything else, but there are so many more stories in baseball than any other sport. There is so much to pick apart, and let's be honest. Also, there's so much more access to extract that than I think a lot of these other sports.
Yeah,
So,
which is what one other thing that attracted me to baseball those years ago too is not just the game, but the pace of the game. I always thought lent itself to good writing. Um, I mean, hey, I love basketball. I'm a basketball junkie too, but that game moves so quick. You don't have those breaks to sit and ponder dissect the game as it's going and think about what you're writing. But aside from the pace of the game, the access, there's no doubt, the access we get in the clubhouses. And, I mean, when I was just breaking in, you go from covering different sports and, I did a little bit of NFL football and, whatever. It was so strict. It's like the quarterback talks once a week or whatever
yeah,
it is. And then the locker room is open, you know, twice a week for an hour or whatever it is, and that's it. Whereas, baseball, we get the access every day, which part of the beauty of it, you're able to develop relationships
hmm
with players and you're able to just find things out. And I don't mean necessarily find things out and, what all the scandals are, but just find things out in terms of interesting stories. It's like, oh, so the outfielder, you didn't realize last winter he did this, this, and this. And then you ask a few questions and you're able to kind of go wherever your curiosity takes you. And I think that's why there's been so much great baseball writing over the decades.
when people ask me this question, I really hate it because I can't. One just doesn't pop to mind. So I'll phrase it this way. Give me one story that you really, really enjoyed writing. Like I said, the question to a lot of people, well, what's your favorite story? Who's the favorite person you would like to talk to? There's too many people, there's too many stories.
Yeah.
But for you, what was like one story that maybe you really, really enjoyed doing?
Oh boy,
I
that's
know
tough.
it's a totally
Yeah.
unfair question.
A couple years ago, I did a winter time, and sometimes the winter time
Oh,
stories are my favorite because you're away from the ballpark. You get a chance maybe to see guys in different environments. I did a story for the New York Times maybe 3 winters ago now. On Dusty Baker. He's always been into wine, and he has his family label of wines in the Sacramento area, Dusty, Baker Family Wines. And I went to his house and spent some time with him in his vineyard during the winter. And he was actually working in the vineyard, and we talked wine and where his love for it comes in and how it ties in with baseball and the hard work and that he doesn't want to just be a figurehead. He's got a vineyard in his backyard at his home and he's out there working it. And I still remember he said he was explaining to me, he showed me in a vineyard like the grapes and he said, okay, now whatever side it was, the north side or whatever, that's the side that this side gets overgrown, and then the other side of the grape is what grows and where you get the wine. And he explained it. The one side I've learned you got to let grow because you need an umbrella for the sun so that the other side of the grape doesn't get too much sun. He said, because if you do, then you get raisins, and I don't want no raisins.
there's definitely a baseball analogy in there somewhere, but that's exactly what we're talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
that's exactly what we're talking about. And the fact is that you're able, because your relationship with Dusty, because this is baseball. It's baseball, it's the people, it's the stories. And to come back to something you also said, Scott, is that when we're talking about the evolution of falling in love with baseball, well, this is sort of the segue I'm going to give to the topic that I want to talk about, which is the segue with the evolution of running teams and managers, general managers. You have a book coming out about that evolution with managers. I know that we're going to talk a lot about it in the coming months. I'll let you sort of like this give the baseline version, and then we can go from there. And then again, like we'll talk a ton about it as it gets closer, But tell me a little bit about it.
I appreciate you bringing that up. And yeah, yeah. In fact, Dusty's in the book. It's called Skipper: Why Baseball Managers Matter and Always Will. And it's a project that's been going about the last 2.5 years. Publication date is next May 13th. So, yeah, that's why we're a little on the early side still, but I'm excited to finally, most of the manuscript is done now. I'm still doing some final revisions, but it essentially looks at the job of a manager, and it's a wide ranging over the decades look, starting in about the late 70s when Earl Weaver and Sparky Anderson and Billy Martin managed. And, they were the authoritarian guys. And back in the day, managers had all the power. And it goes from then to now, where you have today's managers that the game's changed so much that, obviously they have to, they have a lot of authority, but not total authority because they've got to, deal with the baseball operations office and the analysts and all the input they get from them. So the book kind of looks at what the job of a manager was back in the day when you had those classic managers like Earl Weaver, what it is today, how we got from then to now, and why we got from then to now. So we kind of go all the way over the years and decades, and we kind of go through the Moneyball era again and beyond that. And I probably talked to almost about 200 people on
Oh
this.
man.
Today's managers, retired managers, today's players, some retired players, executives of today, executives of yesterday. And anyway, hopefully people like it. I had a lot of fun doing it. And, I hope it's a unique look at the job from then to now and that people enjoy it. I'm excited for it to be almost done finally and coming out early next year.
I'm not just saying that is a sweet spot of like everything baseball right now. Like it is such a great conversation and also I'm fascinated to find out about how like one of the things you just mentioned was how the managers were in charge. Like the managers were in charge, right? I
Right.
mean, Earl Weaver wasn't and I remember Joe Madden's line a year or so ago where he said, this is the problem is that you have too many, when the game starts at 7 o'clock, you have too many voices in your head,
Right. A lot
and
of voices
a
today.
lot of, you must have come across, a lot of the voice, that is a very real thing. And I think it's a big part of this managing right now is probably managing the voices, right?
Yeah, it is. And Rob, I think what makes it interesting, I think there's a view today from a lot of people that uh the manager's completely diminished, right? Because there's so much information from analytics. And I always say like to boil it all down, it's like the simplest uh way to break it all down is with the lineup card today, right? I mean, how many people do you talk to? And we both do every day. There's all this speculation about, certain teams, who's really right. The manager doesn't even write the lineup out anymore. It's handed to him from the analytics department and things like that. And I think, the position of manager today isn't as maybe respected as it was years ago. Um, Certainly it's tamed quite a bit. I mean, back in the day, and you can look at the numbers when teams hired Billy Martin, when the Oakland A's hired Billy Martin, when the Detroit Tigers hired Billy Martin, I mean, he sold tickets. You look at the
Yeah.
numbers. I mean, there used to be Earl Weaver, I mean,
I'm going to give
manager.
you another one. It's funny you said that because I'm thinking as you're talking, I'm thinking of media guides
Yeah,
and well, I guess RIP Tropicana Field, but the one I
yeah,
always see like Lou Piniella front and center on the media guide, right?
right, right.
Yeah.
And today, it's almost like you look across the game. I can't think of one manager today that helps sell tickets just because the way the game has evolved. They're all, I mean, their personalities are more bland because they have to be because they're on TV. Every game's televised now. So, they're the face of the franchise, and whoever does the hiring wants to, make sure that the manager presents a good, friendly face on television. But anyway, go back when I started saying this between analysts and managers and kind of the tug of war for power. Um, one way I boil it down with going back to the lineups is, you talk to whoever it is, front office people, managers, about that subject, the lineup card. Who writes the lineup card? That's essentially the baseball version of kids asking their parents leading questions about where do babies come from. It's like all of a sudden the conversation gets really awkward and nobody really wants to fully talk about it. And that's where we are with, managers and lineup cards today. But yeah, the point of the book, the subtitle is why baseball managers matter and always will, because no matter how you want to slice it and dice it, no matter how much power the front office takes from the manager, different ways in different organizations, but still the manager's down there in that clubhouse. He's the one that deals with the players. And, managing it's still a huge job today, maybe different than years ago, but you can't completely diminish it like I think a lot of people do today, because there's still the leadership role. And if the players look at the manager and they just see, well, you're not pulling any strings at all, it's all from the front office, well, then there's no respect for the manager and he's not going to last long in the clubhouse. So there are various layers today. There are various complicating factors, but still, and we've seen it in the World Series the last few years. I mean, look at the job Dave Roberts did this year. And then even the last few years, you had your older.
I was just going to say this. So I kept saying this, Scott. If you go back to the last 3 years, it's not complicated. The final four, the vast majority of those managers were, I would be considered older managers. Almost all of them. Like your guy, like you said, Dusty Baker, Rob Thompson. I'm trying to think now. Like
Bruce Bochy.
Wins
a fourth World Series.
Bruce Bochy. And so
and even the year before him, Atlanta, Brian Snitker. He's not like Tony La Russa that he's got 100 years in the major leagues, but still he managed like 2,500 minor league games before getting his chance at Atlanta. So you still can classify Snitker as kind of an old school manager, and so Snitker, Bochy, Dusty Baker, you're exactly right.
And I think that the lesson to be learned from there is exactly what you're talking about in sort of the subtitle of your book. They'll always matter.
Yeah.
And because, yes, the analytics are important. Yes, a big part of that is understanding how to distribute and picking out what's important, what's not. But you correct me if I'm wrong. I think that the understanding, the communication and delegation, those two things are maybe at the top of the list. And the evidence I have is those guys that you just mentioned.
No, that you're exactly right. The communication, delegation. I mean, a guy like Bruce Bochy always has a great coaching staff, and he's not afraid to delegate. Let this guy do this. Let this guy do this, and then he's able to then step back and oversee the way things are going, and he makes sure things are working here, they're working there, and if something's not, then he's able to step in and fix it. And communication, I think probably, that's, from talking to almost any manager today, that's probably more important than it's ever been. Because again, back in the day, if Earl Weaver or Sparky Anderson told a player to do something, they did it. They didn't question it. It was like that chain of command from the authority figure down just flowed. Whereas today, it's such a different world today, and the communication comes in so important because, now a manager may tell a player to do something, but that player has spent the winter working on his hitting it drive line,
Yes.
or he spent the winter working with his own personal pitching coach. So again, that's where a lot of the different voices we were talking about earlier come. You got all these voices, not just in the manager's head, but in the player's head, because they've all got their guys they go home to, and there's specialized coaches. So when a manager today wants a player to do something, the communication comes into effect, because it's no more is it like, hey, you need to choke up with 2 strikes. The players today come back with, well, why? Why do I need that? Because I've learned this, and then the communication has to come in.
There's so many different questions and avenues I want to go, but I keep coming back to like the here and the now of the guys who are being interviewed. I would love to be in these interviews for these managers' jobs, right? I would love to know what they're prioritizing, what they're being asked. I remember the story I love with Kevin Cash, when Kevin Cash was hired by the Rays. I mean, he basically came out of nowhere. I mean, a couple of years before, he was an advanced scout for the Blue Jays. He was Tito Francona made him the bullpen coach for the Cleveland team, and then out of nowhere, he gets this interview. And the part that I love was how Cleveland put him through a 6-hour interview, including dressing up in a suit to practice for the Rays interview. So I love that, but I also like wonder, well, what does that interview look like? And I know that they go through scenarios and everything else, but the guys that were just hired, a couple guys, Will Venable with the White Sox, Clayton McCullough with Miami. I would imagine like that those interviews are even dramatically different than the interviews we saw probably like back when Cash was interviewing. Certainly,
Yeah, I think no doubt about it, and you're right, and and different organizations still do things differently, so not every interview is the same. What Will Venable went through with the White Sox, I'm sure was different than what Clayton McCullough went through in Miami. But yeah, I mean, I've heard stories from all the way from, you know, what one interview might be, with a big organization, might be 3 days worth. You meet with the ownership, you meet with the baseball ops people, you're taken through, maybe watch a video of a game and you manage with it and then show how you can manage or how you might manage. There are fake press conferences that to see how you do with the media. And then other organizations maybe don't go quite that far. I mean, because again, all 30 teams have unique needs, desires, and circumstances. So, if you're interviewing, say, if you're Aaron Boone or Dave Roberts and you're interviewing for the Yankees or the Dodgers jobs, the media part of it is going to play bigger in the interview, I think, than say what Clayton McCullough went through down in Miami. I mean, no offense to certainly to our friends in the Miami media, but there's just the demands aren't there, on the manager. It's just a small contingent, and the manager, isn't going to have to deal with 25 or 30 media every day, like or more, like Aaron Boone and Dave Roberts does.
Yeah, so when you look at the guys who handle things the best, it's almost like we can. I love power rankings, but I'm not going to put you on the spot. But you mentioned Dave Roberts. I think Dave Roberts, watching him manage in the postseason, he had a really good run, man. Like he had a really good run. It was across the board. But I like, who are some of the managers that you don't have to say, well, here's the best, but that you really admire, that you like? And again, like, I think that some of these managers evolve. I think Dave Roberts has evolved. You go back to 2018 World Series to this World Series, I think he totally evolved. But it's not only evolving as a manager, it's evolving with the media, it's evolving with juggling the front office. Who are some of the guys that you really sort of like, oh man, I would hire that guy if I was a GM?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, since we're talking about Dave Roberts, certainly he's one. And I mean, what he did this year, start with the World Series and the postseason, because that's the most recent and the most obvious. Those bullpen games he ran, in October especially, that's probably the toughest thing to do because I mean, Rob, I mean, the easiest second guess in baseball, in any sport, I think, for fans is postseason baseball, the bullpen moves, right? Because there's so many of them now. Starters just don't go 7 or 8 innings. So it's always a second guesser's buffet in the postseason.
So true.
Oh, the manager, he left the starter in too long, or no, he took him out way too early, or he shouldn't have called for this reliever, he should call for that one. And Roberts has gotten clobbered on social media in past years for the way he's done things. And I think you're right. I think, he let Walker Buehler go a little bit longer than maybe I think he would have. Rich Hill back in 2018. I think he learned a few things there, but also, every reliever he called for this postseason, unlike in the past, I mean, he was gold. I don't think he made a mistake.
Well, can I, not to interrupt, but
Yeah.
can I give you the example,
Yeah.
the Blake Trinan example?
Yes.
Like, so we're sitting in the press box behind the Dodgers dugout. And as he walks out on the top step, very subtle move. Like he just goes like slower, like basically says with his hands to Blake Trinan, calm down, calm down. And like that was almost saying, I'm not going to take you out. And he goes out there and he does what, what for Red Sox fans it's called a Grady Little, but in this case it worked out. But he goes out there and I can't imagine 2018 Dave Roberts doing that. He had an unbelievable feel for the game and also unbelievable feel for Blake Trinan, the pitcher at that moment, right?
Exactly. And I think that's a key part of managing today. Going back to what we talked about, it's different and players maybe question you. You have to, I think, know each player individually as much today, or probably more today than ever, to get the most out of them, because things have gotten more complicated, like I said, with individual coaches and driveline and things like that. But in terms of that evolution, I'll get back to your question about some of the best managers working today. But it reminds me, I had a little anecdote in the book I did with Bob Tewksbury, 90% Mental.
Great book.
Thank you. When he was in St. Louis and Joe Torre was managing in St. Louis, and this ties into what you just said with Dave Roberts, I think the evolution of a manager. Tewksbury, of course, the book was about the whole mental aspect of baseball. And he was pitching in St. Louis one day, and he was toward the end of the game. Things were getting dicey, and Joe Torre came out instead of the pitching coach. Torre, the manager, came out to the mound. And Tewksbury was younger, as was Torre. So they're both still kind of developing. And Tewksbury saw Torre coming out and he thought, okay, he's removing me from the game. Torre gets to the mound, talks to Tukes a little bit, wants to see what he has. And his intent was just to kind of like Dave Roberts, like Trinan. I'm not going to send the pitching coach out. I want to personally go see where my pitcher's at. But Tewksbury thought he's going to take me out. Torre left him in, went back to the dugout. And the way Tewksbury tells the story, because he thought Torre was going to take him out, he started to let down mentally a little bit. And the rest of that inning, he got clobbered. The next 2 or 3 batters, he got hit, boom, boom, boom. Torre comes out, removes him. So the next day they talked, and Tewksbury told Torre, yeah, I thought you were going to remove me. Anyway, I don't know if it was from that incident alone or from a couple, but after that, whenever Torre was managing and he wanted to go talk to the pitcher himself during a game, what he started doing was, if he was undecided, he thought, I want to see what the pitcher has to say, but I'm not necessarily going to remove him. He would jog to the mound.
Oh, interesting.
If he was going to remove the pitcher, he would just walk to the mound. And the jog was assigned to the pitcher, like, hey, don't let your mental guard down. I just want to see where we're at here. I'm not necessarily going to take you out. I always found that, very interesting. And that's part of the evolution of the manager.
It's so true. And I think that Terry Francona, he had made, I think this is the way he really has done things, is that I only go out there if I'm taking out the pitcher, for the most part.
Right.
And other guys like take that tack too. But it's also how much more powerful it is when I can't imagine Dave Roberts did that a lot in the regular season, right? I didn't see every
Right.
Dodgers game, but how
Yeah.
powerful that moment was where, okay, let's go. Especially for a guy like Blake Trinan, who
Yeah.
is, who seems to be able to power through on the biggest stage there. One
Mhm.
thing, a guy who I really love having on and always have a great relationship with John Gibbons, who
Yeah.
is
Love Gibby.
right, Gibby, right? He's a bench coach for the Mets now. And I guess there's two parts of this was the first part is that Gibby's story this year is so incredible to me. And I think it's a credit to the Mets in the
Yeah.
sense of you have Carlos Mendoza, manager. He has all the things that checks off the box for David Stern, who is perceived as sort of the new age of GMs.
Yep.
And then as a bench coach, John Gibbons had no relationship with Mendoza at all. None. But
Which is amazing because that's one of
right?
the manager and bench coach, like that's almost as important a relationship as there is.
It really is amazing. And then, but they said they valued what he delivered. They obviously knew enough about him, and then it worked out. And then it worked
Yeah.
out. It really is. I think that a big part of managing and also general managing is being secure in yourself. And I think that's a big problem, with a lot of these guys. You know what I'm saying? I think
Yeah.
that was good for the Mets for doing that.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And that also goes to show you, Rob, that I think that's why it's like so much in this game, everything's a moving target, and you can't just definitively say this is a stupid idea or that's a great idea. And the reason I mention that, the hiring of Mendoza, I mean, David Stearns, they throw overboard Buck Showalter, who's one of the greatest managers in the game, and he's such a rules wonk that Showalter knows everything, and he's a really good manager. And when they made that move, from the outside, my first reaction was, "Oh my God, they've got this guy that's been there, done that, and he can win." One of the conversations about managers is, how many games can they win? That and you always hear, well, the very best managers, the geniuses, maybe they can account for 3 or 4 wins a season themselves with decisions. That's always a great debate. How much is a manager responsible for? But Showalter is one of the guys you think could, because he can point out a rule to the umpire that maybe the umpire missed in the middle of a game and help his team win.
Mm.
So you go back to Mendoza and it's like, oh my God, they're bringing this guy's never managed before to replace this guy that's managed 8,000 games and is one of the best. This isn't going to go well. It did go well. It went really well. And Mendoza looks like he's got a great future. And to your point, adding Gibbons to the mix, I'm sure helped that some, and is going to help Mendoza's development.
Yeah. So another thing that Gibby had mentioned, he said he goes back to what Frank Howard said to him, and I'm going to paraphrase, but it's something to the effect of, the whoever has the most cannons are going to win the battle, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
the biggest cannons.
Yeah.
And he's not wrong. I mean, he's not
No.
wrong, right? I mean, it's what we come back to, exactly what you just said. How many games can a manager actually win? So.
Right.
So when you look at that, what is that dynamic? Like the Dodgers were supremely talented, the Yankees were supremely talented, but I think maybe the biggest thing with all of them is managing personalities.
Yeah.
But still, the teams with the biggest cannons are going to win as long as you manage the personalities.
No, that's right. That's true. Then that brings me back to Dave Roberts. We were talking a little bit ago, and then I kind of got sidetracked.
Yeah,
Back to Roberts. Okay, this postseason, he did a great job. But then you rewind it all summer long. The job Roberts did was just phenomenal. You lose Mookie Betts for 2 or 3 months with a broken hand. Um, your starting pitching goes down one after another. By September, they had lost Tyler Glasnow, who was supposed to be an ace, and Yamamoto missed 3 months during the season with a shoulder injury. And the Dodgers, they had every reason to start feeling sorry for themselves by July and August, and they had so many injuries. And Roberts, again, the communication. He had a meeting. I think it was after Mookie went down, but he had a meeting. He basically told Dodgers, he said, look around this room. There's still enough talent to win here. Let's not be, oh, we're without Mookie or we're without this guy or that guy. And Roberts was masterful all summer long as well, not just with strategic decisions, but in managing those personalities like you're talking about and getting people to still believe and to play. And, so much of that is the task of a modern manager today. And also, by the way, when Mookie Betts last summer moved in from the outfield to play second base, play shortstop, a lot of that was predicated on discussions with Dave Roberts. He and Roberts talked, and Roberts now says they've gone so close that Mookie's like a son to him. And a lot, it was Dave Roberts' idea to maybe, hey, try you in the infield, and he talked to Mookie about it. And Mookie from his Boston years, I'm sure way better than I do, but those superstars like that, whether they want to change positions, because it gets back to the egos and the insecurity too. Right? If you're a Gold Glove right fielder like Mookie Betts is, it's not every one of those guys that's going to say, I'll come in as shortstop, because it's like, well, I could embarrass myself. But, that's another area where, Roberts had talked to Mookie and facilitated that.
Well, let me ask you this. I have two more questions. One is managing. They call him manager. What percentage of importance is managing outside the lines, and what percentage of importance is managing inside the lines?
That's a great question, and that cuts, Rob, right to the heart of the job of today's manager. I would say, you go back to the Earl Weaver days, and probably, I don't know, I'm going to say maybe 70% of managing, 80% was in the 9 innings itself. It's almost flipped. It's like the in-game strategy now is only like maybe, I don't say 20%. I'd say of the job, 20 or 25%. I'd say 75, 80% is outside the game. And the reason I say that is because the game has changed so much, and forget the bunt anymore. Analytics has shifted things. And, back in Earl Weaver and Sparky Anderson's days, there was a lot of, okay, are we going to hit and run now? Are we going to bunt now? When should we? And that strategy's gone, because hit and run's gone because there's so many strikeouts in today's game, or people don't want to run into an out on the bases. The bunting's gone. So a lot of the game, I think today's game is pretty straightforward managing. I know from talking to some old school people for this book that I did, they told me, like Sparky Anderson, for example, said whenever you weren't expecting something is when Sparky would pounce with some kind of strategic move to shake things up. Again, whether it's a bunt, a steal, a hit and run, whatever it might be. And so it's almost like you had to do it to Sparky before he did it to you in a game. Whereas today, there's biggest job is just making sure you pull the right levers when it's time to call for your first relief pitcher, your second relief pitcher, your third relief pitcher, and a lot of that other strategy is gone. So, I think, in the old days, it was 75% strategy in game was important. And I'm saying it's flipped completely now to 75%.
Wow. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's true. I totally agree. It's true. All right. So the last thing is a conversation that we've had in the course of the first half of the season anyway. Alex Cora's contract was up. And whenever a manager's contract was, it wasn't only Alex Cora. You knew Schumacher was probably going to phase out in Miami, so he was potentially a hot commodity in the manager's market. And everything came back to Craig Counsell's contract, this $8 million contract. And there was a couple ways to look at it, where a lot of managers said, well, that sets the bar, right? Yet it was so different. From what I understand, there wasn't another manager making as much as $5 million. Correct. So, which is kind of crazy to me too. It's a middle relief pitcher.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Well, then
So,
you go outside of baseball. You look at college football coaches, college basketball coaches, NFL coaches. I mean, managers are criminally underpaid compared to their counterparts at other sports. But go on.
you're absolutely right. I didn't even think about the college football. Oh my goodness. Um, but so Council makes $8 million.
Yeah.
But the problem is, as the year is going on, the Cubs aren't playing well.
Yeah.
You know that, and so the owners can look at it a couple of ways. The owners can look at it as, well, yeah, he got paid $8 million, but look, it's not really worth it. Or they could just look at it, well, in a bigger picture point of view. Now, Cora makes his money. He makes $7 million.
Yeah.
And so that, good for him. But I don't know if there's going to be another manager. This is my point. I'm really anxious to get your thought on it. I don't know if there's going to be another manager for a while that comes close to Council. I mean, Cora is probably going to be, I don't know. I don't think there's going to be.
A couple things here, Rob. One, Craig Counsell, he said it himself, but in fact, he's another guy I talked to for the book. We talked a little bit about manager salaries, and his point was always, to make any money as a manager, you've got to just become a free agent, which is what he did. But the other end of that is, it also depends on when you become a free agent. Because I'll tell you this, if Craig Counsell became a free agent manager, let his contract run out in Milwaukee, after the Brewers finished last a couple years, doesn't matter if you're a free agent manager, you ain't going to make that money. But he had won and won and won in Milwaukee. Then he becomes a free agent. Most managers don't get to the point where they're free agents. They get extended by their clubs or whatever, and that helps depress salaries. And so you're right. On one hand, Council's making $8 million a year. Again, look at this year's World Series, the managers: Yankees, Dodgers, Aaron Boone, Dave Roberts. Interestingly, both Aaron Boone and Dave Roberts were not signed beyond next year. So, but they both want to stay where they are. So they're not becoming free agents. At least we don't think they will. The Yankees, as you know, picked up Aaron Boone's contract, his option for next year. And Brian Cashman hinted we're looking to extend him. But as we speak today at this moment, Rob, all the Yankees have done, they haven't reached an extension yet. They've picked up his option for next year. Now, Council's at $8 million a year. Aaron Boone was about $4 million last year. Mm-hmm. So Council's making twice the money Aaron Boone makes. And all the Yankees have done so far after Boone got them to the World Series is pick up his option for next year and nothing beyond. And same thing, Dave Roberts is signed for next year. It's not an option. His last year of his contract is next year. And so far, there's been nothing. Now, you would think after he wins the World Series, I fully expect the Dodgers to extend him and, give him props for winning the World Series. But as of right now, they haven't yet. I'm sure there's talks in the back, behind the scenes, but probably a reason why they haven't quite extended him so quickly is because of the money aspect. I would almost guarantee, because Roberts was down around $4 million a year too. You look at the job Roberts did, you would think managing that team, winning a second World Series since 2020. I know that 2020 was COVID shortened year, but also where the Dodgers are concerned, Dave Roberts just finished his 10th year or 9th year. He got him into the playoffs every year. And for managers with a minimum of 1,000 games managed now, Roberts has the all-time best winning percentage of any manager in the game for managers at 1,000. So you would think it's a no-brainer. He should make Craig Counsell money, $8 million a year or whatever. But stay tuned. We'll see.
The free agent thing is a powerful thing, though. You hit the nail on the head. And that's what Cora was approaching it.
Yeah. Right.
At least, he was saying, he was more than a lot of managers saying, not desperate, hey, give me extension, please give me extension. It's like, oh, we'll see. Yeah. Whatever. Yeah. It worked out. Yeah. It worked out for him.
For him, it worked out great. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, it's working out for you. I appreciate it because you're awesome. and I can't wait. I love this conversation. I appreciate you taking so much time doing it. And I could talk for hours upon hours upon hours, and it's such a great topic, and you're such a good person to talk to about it. So anyway, Scott, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate everything.
Thank you. And yeah, when the book, as we get closer to next May 13th, when the book comes out, yeah, I'd love to talk to you, and maybe we get more in depth about some of what's inside those pages.
Oh, it's gonna be good. Thank you. Thanks so much, Scott.
Thanks, Rob.